Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting pair of boots that has some pretty cool builds going for it, and that is known as the Path of Trag'oul boots. The Path of Trag'oul boots are these interesting little booties that have some, well, very interesting connotations. Interestingly. I know I said interesting like 16 times. But it really is true. In fact, I need a supporting item here to show you some other effects with this. And we're going to play around with some of these things as well. And I need just like a regular sword as well so that we can really show off the muscle of this item. Now, first off, this item is basically based around two things. Well, actually three things, technically. Number one is Bone Prison. Number two is Bone Spirit, and number three is Bone Splinters. And so, like, it really kind of has like a little bit of everything going on with it, in that it kind of scales. Also, you could potentially use it for Bone Spear too, actually. So let's go 4 skills. But they are kind of focused around Bone Prison, although not really. Like, it's kind of an odd thing. And we'll talk about why it's not really Bone Prison, although it is Bone Prison, blah, 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 blah. So let's go over the item first, and then we'll talk about all the specific details and go over some of the more intricate stuff. So first off, these are +3 maximum evade charges, and as you can clearly see, I currently have them masterworked to 5 of 12, so do keep that in mind, which means that the stats are going to be a little bit lower on yours when you get them, but obviously once you masterwork yours up to 4 to 12, it's going to be even better. So as you can see, you get a pretty nice pump of armor there, which is, I think it's about 1,500 on the base, but mine's up to a maximum of 1,800 at the moment. Pretty decent amount of movement speed of 15 to 21.6%. The Bone Prison cooldown, which is 15.6 to 21%. And of course, that's a little bit higher than it would normally be. I also have a greater affix roll on the bone skills, which is really nice. And that's normally 3, but it went up to 4. Or actually, no, it's normally 2. It went up to 3, and I masterworked it to 4. Yes, if I remember correctly. All right. It's so difficult to keep track of all these like greater affixes and everything going on. Like, it definitely gets to the point where you are messing around with a lot of stuff to get different bonuses. I honestly kind of wish there was like a, something that would show you the original stats before everything would change. But as you can see, 1 to 2 bone skills, 1750 on the max armor, 1750 on the both person cooldown, and 18% of the movement speed. And of course, we also have the main effect, which is of course the Bone Prison. Mouse won't stay still for some reason. Probably dog hair stuck in it, or chinchilla hair. That's right. I blame you. Bone Prison traps a larger area and fires 10 to 30 bone splinters at the enemy trapped within. Increases your maximum essence by 2 for 10 seconds each time these bone splinters hit an enemy. Now, first off, let's take a look at Bone Prison without the Path of Trag'oul. So without the Path of Trag'oul, your Bone Prison, of course, looks like this. It's not very impressive. It fits a small number of monsters in. If you're using Corpse Tendrils, you could, of course, suck all the monsters into that area, but it's not going to be like the most amazing amount. It's also important to note, and this is something that you really need to pay attention to, is that when you cast Bone Prison, if you accidentally press the button again, you can delete your Bone Prison before it's active. And this is going to come in to perspective once we go over how the item works. So the next thing that you're going to do is you put the boots on, of course, and then you use it, and you're like, whoa, way bigger area. And another thing you're going to notice is that the bone splinters are firing from the bone prison itself inward toward the enemy. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to. So this allows you to get out more damage. However, if you accidentally press the button a second time, you're going to delete the bone prison before it has a chance to fire the bone splinters, and then the bone splinters basically do nothing. So you have to make sure that you're not accidentally double tapping that button like this and accidentally deleting your bone prison, at which you can see you're getting none of the bone splinters, which is going to be a pretty big deal if you're relying on those bone splinters for damage output. On top of this, you'll notice that my current maximum essence is 194. Of course, it's much lower because I took off my grandfather. But when I use this, you'll notice my maximum essence is starting to rise, which of course is going to give me more damage output for a myriad of skills that are based upon maximum essence. So the more maximum essence you have for abilities, the better when it comes to things like Bone Spirit, which scales 4% times off of each point of maximum essence that you have. Also, Bone Spear also scales based off of maximum essence, but it scales based off of maximum essence through the ossified essence key passive, which gives you your bone skills deal 0.5% increased damage for each point of essence you have, up to 50 upon cast. Current bonus is 72.1. And then we have even more. So there's things like critical strike chance is increased for each 30 essence you have upon cast. We also have the rapid ossification, which is every 100 essence you spend, reduces the cooldowns of your bone skills by 1.5 seconds. And there's a lot of various ways, basically, that the Necromancer is scaling based off of this maximum essence. There's even a Paragon node in the Paragon tree that is based off of maximum essence for this character. So having huge amounts of essence is a big deal for him. It's called the Bone Graft aspect. And let me put that up there so you guys can actually see it. Hitting an enemy with bone skills increases your damage by 1% times and your maximum essence by 2 for 8 seconds and stacks up to 8% times, increased damage, and 16 maximum essence. So as you can see, we've got a lot of ways to increase our maximum essence to make our damage higher, and that's definitely very nice. On top of this, increasing our maximum essence can also reduce the cooldown of Bone Prison as well, which is also rather interesting. So because through the ossified essence passive, and this is something that you kind of have to take into account, and I know things are getting highly technical here, but a lot of this stuff on the Necromancer is very fun because stacking essence has a lot of various effects. So this one in particular is the rapid ossification, which you can actually get passives of, but I usually recommend getting the Macabre Skills Restore resource if you're doing Bone Spirit instead of the Rapid Ossification, but that's up to you. But with this particular one, you're going to get a cooldown of 1.5 seconds off of whatever skill for every 100 you spend, right? Well, I currently have 194. We're going to go ahead and use Bone Prison, and you'll notice that I'm currently at 7 seconds, and I have over 200. I spend Bone Prison, and I immediately drop that 3-second cooldown off of my Bone Prison. So Bone Prison now becomes 3 seconds shorter just simply because I spent 200 maximum essence. And this also works, of course, for your Bone Storm. When you use your ability, you'll notice a direct reduction in the cooldown because you're spending large amounts of resource. So resource is not only about, obviously, making your skills do more damage. It's also about, reducing the cooldown of things. It's also about, just simply like how much you can restore, which is also another interesting facet of this because it gets very complicated. Is that Bone Spirit also has a restore based on your maximum essence. It restores 30% of your maximum essence over the next 4 seconds. Now, the higher your essence is, the more it will restore, right? So if I'm at 100, 30% of 100 is 30. 30% of 200 is 60. 30% of 300 is 90, and so forth and so on. So we're going to get a much larger return for having more maximum essence. And as you can see, the Trag'oul boots are helping us out by giving us more maximum essence, which is definitely very nice. Now, even further than this is the bone splinters themselves, which can actually be scaled through the use of items like Shard of Erethiel, adaptability aspect. You can also use Moonrise, things that scale basic damage. So you can even set it up so that when you use your ability, like for instance, let's go back to the original sword, and you see the bone splinters firing at the target, you notice they're only doing about like 9 to 10k. They're topping out around 12k. If I put on Shard of Erethiel and I do the same thing, you'll notice that now they're hitting for 20. 18, 25, 37k. So you can see that not only can you scale your Bone Spear, your Bone Prison, your Bone Spirit with this, but you could also technically use basic skill items to enhance the actual damage of the ability. And obviously this is a crappy Shard of Erethiel. It only has 80% times. I've got a much better one on my other character. But imagine, if you will, you're utilizing all of those items. So if I had a very nice, Moonrise aspect, adaptability aspect, I grab the Shard of Erethiel, maybe use Edge Masters along with it. There's a lot of ways that you can potentially do that. On top of that, there's also another aspect. It's called the Shattered Spirits aspect, and it goes on a ring slot, which I don't have right now because I've been having trouble getting my hands on it. But it also fires off bone splinters, which also scale the same way. So potentially you could have bone splinters firing out of 3 different sources. Number 1, your main hand, of course, because if you fire the bone splinters off with your main attack, that's one way that you can get bone splinters. You can get a second way of getting bone splinters by using the bone prison and having the bone splinters fire directly at the target. Was that a 190, a 300k overpower bone splinters there? And I'm not even set up for it. And the third way, of course, is that you can use the Shattered Spirits loop for that when you fire bone prison or bone spirit like this, you're going to get free casts of your bone splinters as well, going in a nova around you, which is going to be pretty powerful as well. I've actually considered very heavily leaning into the bone splinters for this build with the bone spirit because they work together kind of synergistically. You're basically just going to be firing off your bone spirit whenever you have full resource, and then you would be firing off all your bone splinters when you don't have full resource, which is not exactly terrible. And of course the bone prison fires inwardly, and the bone Shattered Spirits loop fires outwardly, which is all very cool. And of course stacking maximum resource helps with pretty much all of this except for the bone splinters itself. Now, there's some other interesting things you can do with Bone Prison besides this. One of them is the explosion damage for bone sprinters dying. And I don't necessarily think that they're very compatible, and I'll explain myself. So basically with the explosion from the bone splinters doesn't happen until the bone prison is gone. And to get optimal damage for the explosion, you would want to do this. Instantly kill your bone prison, because killing your bone prison yourself will also cause it to explode and dish out that damage. And so like in this particular case, like the two are kind of at odds with each other, and I actually tried to build both and it was just it was absolutely terrible. So you definitely don't want to try and do the basic damage bone splinters and the explosion together. You just kind of want to avoid that. And it's odd. Another thing that you could potentially grab is the bone prison blight aspect. The only thing that I don't like about this one is that it really requires way too many aspects, and I'm going to show it to you real quick. But if you do 2 specific aspects together, you can get a pull-in for your bone prison, which is kind of interesting in terms of like not having to use, say, corpse tendrils. But I don't really think it's necessary, like from a certain standpoint. So like if we pull up bone prison, we get 2 of them, which is the bursting bones. That's the one I was talking about earlier that explodes. So it makes an explosion for every segment. There's a lot of segments on the bone prison. You also get the plunging darkness, which is the bone prison spawns a pool of blight underneath of itself, which is not really necessarily for the blight puddle itself unless you're a shadow necromancer. It's really for the second aspect, which you would want to put in that place, which is a blight aspect specifically. So once you enable the blight puddle to be put underneath of the bone prison, then you end up with this aspect called the aspect of the void, which blights defiled area when spawned, pulls enemies around the affected area in. So it's an interesting way to do it, but the problem is that you have to use 2 aspects to make it work. And the problem with that is that these 2 aspects are just, it's just a lot to fit into your character. So you may not have those aspect slots to actually utilize to make this work. And that's basically what I found out too, is that giving up 2 aspects for that is pretty rough. I'd actually like to see them combine those into 1. And if they did combine them into 1, it would be a lot better. I don't think if there's anything else to go over with these. We've talked about the scaling of the bone splinters, which is actually really powerful, by the way. I've seen some people fully scaling it up with shards of Erethiel and all the other stuff, and it does really good damage. I do rather enjoy the increase to maximum essence when I'm doing my bone prison build. On top of this, you can also make this even stronger by utilizing another aspect, which is the imprisoned circle. This is a new one that came out. And it's basically when a bone spirit explodes inside of a bone prison, it explodes an additional time, dealing 70% of the normal damage. Bone Spirit now prioritizes enemies that are inside of the bone prison, and so it basically gives you a way to, fire that shot at a target and have it more likely to target the monster within. And it also doubles, basically, well, not quite, but 70%. It basically doubles your bone spirit damage. My brain farting here. So, for instance, if I fire a bone spirit at this particular target right now, let's just go ahead and get our resource up real quick. So I have Banished Lord's Talisman, so I see I'm spending 275 primary resource. And let's put my grandfather back on. So if I fire this normally at the target, you see 58 million damage, right? 58 million damage overpower. It's not even that impressive. My Barbarian was kicking for like 500 million. This guy's got a long way to go before he's really kind of like min-maxed out. However, if I do the same thing again with the Bone Prison activated, like this,
I need more time.
as you can see, it hits and then it pulses a second time within it for another big pump of damage, right? So in this particular case, I can utilize this to my advantage to get large swaths of increased, output. So I'm going to throw that down again, and I'm going to throw out my Bone Prison, and as you can see, we got 118 million and then 123 million. Yeah, it's more like it. That's like 250 million just about. Obviously I'm doing quick math here, but the 250 million is definitely a hell of a lot better than the 100 million because I basically just doubled my Bone Spirit. And so using this one in combination with this one is also very powerful as well, because not only do you have more monsters inside of that field, and they're more likely to be targeted by the Bone Spirit when inside the Bone Prison, but now it doubles the explosion, giving you a larger amount of damage, and you're also getting more Bone Spirit damage from the maximum essence that's being created by the Bone Prison itself. So you got a lot of really fun aspects going on here to multiply out your damage. Now, you don't necessarily have to use these boots to get access to the doubling. You can get the doubling without it, as you can see. But I'm also not getting the increase to my maximum essence, which is really important. Now, if you're doing the Banished Lord's build with the Bone Spirit, it's very important to note that there is a specific barrier which you have to achieve to get maximum damage output, and that is you need a bare minimum of 275 maximum essence. And you might be asking me, why do you need a bare minimum of 275 maximum essence? Well, because Banished Lord's Talisman itself has a limit of after you spend 275 primary resource, your next core skill will overpower. If you don't spend 275 resource, like for instance right now you can see I'm only at 238, and I fire off my ability, you'll notice that now I only have 238 here on the counter. This means that my next Bone Spirit is not going to be a guaranteed overpower because I not spent enough resource to achieve that. So my next one is basically going to be wasted because it's not going to be an overpower. Only did 1.4 million. But now you see I am at 275 primary resource, which means my next Bone Spirit after this one will be a guaranteed overpower, which is obviously very nice. But the added benefit of putting the Trag'oul's boots in is that I could potentially hit that 275 relatively easily. So if I'm using my Bone Prison and my maximum essence starts casting up here, as you can see, my maximum essence went up to 282 relatively easily, by the way. And now when I fire off my Bone Spirit, I'm going to get a guaranteed overpower every single time I fire because I've breached that 275 barrier. So not only does that obviously allow you to deal more damage, but it also puts you into the magic sweet spot of hitting that 275 number so that you can obviously maintain your just constant overpower damage. And once you get it all set up and you have it like running properly, it looks something like this, which is basically where you just hold down the button and you dish out massive amounts of damage. Hopefully, if everything is working, which I did put the I did put the amulet back on. I was kind of scared there for a second. So as you can see, 527 million. 812 billion, 431 million. And we're definitely getting the big boy chunky numbers now by scaling that maximum resource, by getting all of our elements in play, right? And we're able to get that overpower basically every single time as long as we can restore our resource. And I know this video is probably one of my longer item videos, but talking about all this stuff is very fun for the Bone Spirit Necromancer, as well as the Bone Prison Necromancer. And I definitely think the two are compatible. I think an optimal setup for Bone Prison Spirit might actually be utilizing, say, like a really epic Bone Splinters setup too. I'm not entirely sure how it would work. I'd have to like figure it out. And unfortunately, I'd probably have to drop the Grandfather for more aspect slots if I did that. Because obviously you have to use the Shard of Erethiel and all the other stuff. I also need my Shattered Spirits loop, which I don't have. And there's just, the Bone Spirit build is just such a fun build because it feels like there's no end to how far you could potentially push it. As you could see there, I was already hitting for like 800 million. And I'm gonna be honest with you, like my Paragon board is okay, but it still needs to be min-maxed much better. I also need to go through the process of changing out my glyphs into the correct ones that have the most stats for that specific thing. I'm min-maxing that stuff out. I'm also thinking about swapping out to the minion version of this, which actually might be a little bit stronger. I'm not entirely sure. There's a lot of fun stuff that you can do with this. I've had 3 seasons of min-maxing and having fun with the Bone Spirit build, and every single season it feels like the Bone Spirit build is getting stronger and more capable. And as you can clearly see there from me almost hitting 1 billion per Bone Spirit without being min-maxed, doing pretty good. Anyway, tell me what you guys think about the Path of Trag'oul boots. Do you like them? Have you been using them for basic builds? Have you been using them for your Bone Spirit builds? Have you been using them for your Bone Spear builds? Are you enjoying them? I think they're pretty good addition to the game in general, and definitely a lot of necromancers are going to be utilizing these for specific builds. And I think there's at least, bare minimum, there's at least like 4 builds that you could potentially use them in, if not more. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos. If you like the content, be sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button. Make sure you say hi to Mr. Dusty Bones here. He is my little friend. He likes to sit with me while I do my videos, and I appreciate it. And as always, keep watching.